Little Emma couldn't breathe. The mean HOA lady watched her dying but wouldn't help because of a stupid plastic table. Rules are rules, she said coldly. Then a soldier came running. He had saved kids in war before. Now he would save Emma from the cruelest enemy of all. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The summer heat pressed down on Maple Street like a heavy blanket, turning the asphalt soft and making the air shimmer with waves of scorching temperature. It was the kind of day when even the birds stayed hidden in whatever shade they could find. But for 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez, this blazing Tuesday afternoon would become the day that changed everything. Emma sat on her family's small front porch, her dark curls damp with sweat, carefully coloring in her favorite book. Her breathing came in short, careful puffs, a reminder of the severe asthma that had plagued her since birth. The doctors had been clear. Extreme heat could trigger dangerous attacks, and stress made everything worse. "Stay in the shade, Mija," her father Miguel had said that morning before leaving for his construction job. "And remember, if you feel any tightness in your chest, you call Mama right away." Miguel Rodriguez was a proud man who worked 2 jobs to afford their modest home in the Willowbrook subdivision. His wife Sophia cleaned houses during the day while studying for her nursing degree at night. They were the kind of people who minded their own business, helped their neighbors when they could, and asked for nothing in return. But Karen Whitmore had other plans for the Rodriguez family. Karen lived in the largest house on the block, a pristine white colonial with perfectly manicured hedges and not a single blade of grass out of place. As the self-appointed president of the Willowbrook Homeowners Association, she ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove of fake smiles and backhanded compliments. At exactly 2:30 p.m., Karen's black Mercedes pulled into her driveway. She emerged wearing her usual uniform, a pressed white blouse, khaki pants, and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. Her sharp eyes immediately zeroed in on Emma's small figure on the porch. The sight that offended Karen so deeply? Emma's plastic water table, a small, cheerful blue contraption that Miguel had bought secondhand to help his daughter stay cool during the brutal heat wave. It sat partially on the Rodriguez's tiny front lawn, maybe 6 inches past the invisible property line that existed only in Karen's obsessive mind. Karen marched across the street with the determination of a general heading into battle. Her heels clicked against the pavement like gunshots in the oppressive silence. "Excuse me," Karen's voice cut through the afternoon heat like a knife. "That table is clearly violating HOA regulations. It's encroaching on common area property." Emma looked up from her coloring book, her large brown eyes wide with confusion. At 8 years old, she didn't understand property lines or HOA regulations. She only knew that the mean lady from across the street was standing over her, casting a shadow that should have been cooling but somehow felt more threatening than the blazing sun. "My daddy said I could play here," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "Your daddy doesn't make the rules in this neighborhood," Karen snapped. "I do. That table needs to move right now or I'm calling the authorities." The stress of the confrontation, combined with the extreme heat, began to take its toll on Emma's fragile respiratory system. Her breathing became more labored, each inhale requiring visible effort. I can't move it by myself," Emma stammered, pressing a small hand to her chest. "It's too heavy." "That's not my problem," Karen replied coldly. "Rules are rules. I don't care if you're 8 or 80. What happened next would haunt Karen for the rest of her life. Emma tried to stand up to move the table, but the combination of heat, stress, and her medical condition created a perfect storm. Her face went pale, then began turning blue around the lips, a terrifying sign that Miguel and Sophia knew all too well. "I can't breathe," Emma gasped, clutching at her throat. Instead of helping, Karen stepped back as if the child's distress was contagious. "Stop being dramatic. Just move the table." But Emma couldn't move anything. She collapsed onto the porch, her small body convulsing as she fought for each breath. Her rescue inhaler was inside the house, but she couldn't speak to tell Karen where it was. "Help me," Emma wheezed, her eyes rolling back. For a moment that lasted an eternity, Karen stood frozen. She watched as the color drained from Emma's face, as the little girl's fingers clawed desperately at her chest. And then, proving that her heart was indeed made of stone, Karen turned away. "I'm calling the HOA violation hotline," she announced, pulling out her phone. "This is ridiculous. But the universe has a way of delivering justice when we least expect it." As Karen dialed her petty complaint, she didn't notice the dark green Jeep that had been parked at the end of the street for the past 10 minutes. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, home on leave from his 3rd deployment in Afghanistan, had been visiting his elderly neighbor Mrs. Chen when he heard the commotion. Jake was the kind of soldier who ran toward danger, not away from it. He had pulled children from burning buildings in Kabul, administered first aid under enemy fire, and carried wounded comrades through minefields. He knew a medical emergency when he saw one. The sound of Emma's labored breathing carried across the street like a battle cry. Jake sprinted toward the Rodriguez house with the speed and determination that had made him a decorated combat medic. He reached Emma's side just as her lips were turning a dangerous shade of blue. "Hey sweetheart, I'm here to help," Jake said, his voice gentle but commanding. He immediately recognized the signs of a severe asthma attack. "Where's your inhaler?" Emma could only point weakly toward the house. Jake scooped her up in his arms, this tiny girl who weighed no more than his military pack, and rushed toward the front door. It was locked. "Ma'am," he called to Karen, who was still on the phone with her complaint. "Do you know if there's a spare key? This child needs her medication right now." Karen looked annoyed at the interruption. "I'm on an important call. Can't you see I'm dealing with an HOA violation?" The words hit Jake like a slap in the face. In Afghanistan, he had seen children caught in the crossfire of adult conflicts, innocent victims of grown-up stupidity and selfishness. But this was America. This was supposed to be different. "Lady, this child is dying and you're worried about a plastic table?" Jake's voice carried the authority of someone who had faced down enemy fire. "She's being dramatic," Karen replied dismissively. "These people always exaggerate everything." Those 4 words, "these people," revealed everything Jake needed to know about Karen Whitmore's character. Without another word, Jake made a decision that would become neighborhood legend. He set Emma down gently on the porch, stepped back and kicked the front door with the full force of his combat boot. The door frame splintered like kindling. Inside, Jake found Emma's rescue inhaler on the kitchen counter. He administered it with the practiced efficiency of someone who had saved lives in war zones. Within minutes, Emma's breathing began to stabilize, the color returning to her face like sunrise after the darkest night. "You're going to be okay, sweetheart," Jake whispered, cradling Emma as her breathing normalized. "You're safe now." But Jake wasn't done. He pulled out his phone and made a call that would change everything. "Command, this is Staff Sergeant Morrison. I need a full medical unit and MPs at 1247 Maple Street. We have a child who nearly died due to civilian negligence and possible harassment." Karen, who had been watching from what she thought was a safe distance, suddenly realized that her afternoon of petty tyranny had taken a very serious turn. Within minutes, the quiet suburban street was filled with military vehicles. 2 medics arrived to ensure Emma was stable, while military police began taking statements. Jake's commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Washington, arrived personally when she heard that one of her decorated soldiers had been forced to break down a door to save a child's life. "Staff Sergeant Morrison," Colonel Washington said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "please explain to me how a child nearly died from an asthma attack while an adult stood by and did nothing." Jake's report was clinical, professional, and devastating. He detailed Karen's refusal to help, her dismissive attitude toward Emma's medical emergency, and her racially charged comment about "these people." Colonel Washington turned to Karen, who suddenly looked very small despite her earlier bravado. "Ma'am, I understand you're the president of this homeowners association?" "Well, yes, but I don't see what this has to do with." "It has everything to do with this," Colonel Washington interrupted. "You nearly caused the death of a child over a property dispute. In the military we call that dereliction of duty. In civilian terms it's called criminal negligence." Karen's face went white. "Now wait just a minute. I was just enforcing HOA rules. That's my job as president." "Your job," Colonel Washington said, her voice cold as Arctic wind, "as a human being, was to help a dying child. Instead, you chose to prioritize a plastic table over a little girl's life." What Karen didn't know was that Colonel Washington had grown up in a military family that had faced housing discrimination. She had seen how petty officials could use their small amount of power to make life miserable for families who were different from them. "Staff Sergeant Morrison," Colonel Washington continued, "please ensure this incident is fully documented. I want a complete report on how civilian authorities handle this case of child endangerment." The words "child endangerment" hit Karen like a physical blow. Those were legal terms. Serious legal terms. By the time Sofia Rodriguez arrived home from work, Maple Street looked like a military operation. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw the ambulance, the military vehicles, and her precious Emma surrounded by medics. "My baby," Sofia cried, rushing to Emma's side. "What happened?" Jake explained the situation while Sophia held her daughter, tears streaming down her face as she realized how close she had come to losing her child. "The lady was mean, Mama," Emma whispered. "She wouldn't help me breathe." Sophia's eyes found Karen, who was now sitting in the back of a police car giving her statement. For a moment, the two women locked eyes across the street. Karen saw something in Sophia's gaze that made her blood run cold, not anger but something far worse. Disappointment. The look of a mother who couldn't understand how another human being could watch a child suffer and do nothing. Miguel arrived from his construction job still covered in sawdust and concrete dust, his face a mask of terror until he saw Emma breathing normally in Sophia's arms. "Who did this to my daughter?" Miguel asked, his voice deadly quiet. Jake placed a gentle hand on Miguel's shoulder. "The situation is being handled, sir. Your daughter is safe and the person responsible is facing consequences." But the consequences were just beginning. The story spread through the military community like wildfire. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison was known as a hero, a soldier who had saved countless lives overseas and continued saving lives at home. When word got out that he had been forced to break down a door to save a child while a HOA president stood by and watched, the response was swift and overwhelming. Military families began moving into Willowbrook subdivision specifically to support the Rodriguez family. These weren't ordinary neighbors. These were Gold Star families, Purple Heart recipients and active duty personnel who understood the value of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Karen found herself surrounded by neighbors who wore their honor on their sleeves, literally. Combat medics who could spot an emergency from 100 yards away. Military police who understood the difference between rules and justice. Officers who had commanded respect on battlefields around the world. The HOA meeting the following week was unlike anything Willowbrook had ever seen. The community center was packed beyond capacity. Sophia and Miguel sat in the front row, Emma between them, her small hand clasped tightly in her father's. Jake sat behind them in his dress uniform, his chest decorated with ribbons that told the story of a man who had served his country with honor. Karen called the meeting to order, but her usual commanding presence was nowhere to be found. Her voice shook as she read the agenda, very carefully avoiding eye contact with the Rodriguez family. First item of business, Karen began weakly, concerns the incident that occurred on Tuesday. "The incident," interrupted Colonel Washington, who had chosen to attend as a concerned community member, "where you nearly caused the death of an 8-year-old child." Karen's lawyer, a nervous man in an expensive suit, whispered urgently in her ear. "I was simply enforcing HOA regulations," Karen said, reading from a prepared statement. "The water table was in violation of our property line restrictions." Jake stood up, his movement commanding the attention of every person in the room. "Ma'am," Jake said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had faced real conflicts, "I've served 3 tours in Afghanistan. I've seen what happens when people choose rules over human life. I've held dying children in my arms, children who were victims of adults who cared more about their ideology than about innocent lives." The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing. "I never thought I'd see the same thing happen in my own country, on a quiet street in suburbia. But last Tuesday, I watched a grown woman choose her petty authority over the life of a child. I watched her turn away from a little girl who was dying, because moving a plastic table was apparently more important than administering life-saving first aid." Jake's words hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. "Emma Rodriguez is 8 years old. She loves to color pictures of butterflies. She wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. She calls her father Poppy, and helps her mother study for nursing school by quizzing her with flashcards." Emma pressed closer to her parents, overwhelmed by the attention but understanding that the nice soldier was trying to help her. "She nearly died because one person in this room decided that property lines matter more than human lives," Jake continued. "In the military we swear an oath to protect and defend. We don't get to choose who deserves protection based on the color of their skin or the size of their house or whether they can afford to belong to the right social clubs." Several people in the audience began to cry. Even some of Karen's former supporters looked uncomfortable. "I've seen real enemies," Jake said, his voice rising slightly. "I've faced people who want to destroy our way of life, who hate everything America stands for. But I never thought I'd find the real threat to our community values sitting in a homeowners association meeting, hiding behind a clipboard and a rule book." Karen's face had gone completely white. Her hands shook as she gripped her gavel. "The Rodriguez family represents everything that makes America great," Jake continued. "They work hard, they take care of their family, they contribute to their community. Miguel Rodriguez builds the houses that shelter our families. Sofia Rodriguez is studying to become a nurse, someone who will spend her career saving lives, not endangering them. Sofia wiped tears from her eyes, overwhelmed by the support from people who barely knew her family. Emma Rodriguez is an American child who nearly died on American soil while an American adult stood by and watched. If that doesn't make you angry, if that doesn't make you question what kind of community we want to live in, then I don't know what will. Jake sat down to thunderous applause. Several people stood up, creating a standing ovation that lasted for nearly 5 minutes. When the room finally quieted, an elderly man named Frank Morrison, Jake's grandfather and a World War II veteran, stood up with the help of his walker. "I fought in the Pacific Theater," Frank said, his voice surprisingly strong for his 92 years. "I've seen what happens when good people do nothing while others suffer. I didn't spend 2 years in a foxhole fighting fascists so that my great-granddaughter could grow up in a community where children are bullied by petty tyrants." More applause erupted. "I motion that Karen Whitmore be removed as HOA president immediately," Frank continued. "And I motion that the HOA bylaws be amended to include a clause about emergency situations overriding all property regulations." "Seconded," called out at least 20 voices simultaneously. Karen's lawyer whispered more urgently in her ear. I resign," Karen announced, her voice barely audible. "Effective immediately." But the community wasn't done with Karen Whitmore. Over the following weeks, the story went viral. A local news station picked up the story of the decorated war hero who broke down a door to save a child while an HOA president watched. The video of Jake's speech at the community meeting was shared millions of times across social media. The headline read, "HOA Karen watches child nearly die, military hero steps in." Karen found herself the target of nationwide outrage. Her real estate license was suspended pending investigation. The HOA voted to remove her from all positions and ban her from future leadership roles. Several families who had considered buying houses in Willowbrook specifically requested to not be shown Karen's property. But the most devastating consequence came from an unexpected source. Karen's own daughter, Jennifer, was a pediatric nurse who lived in another state. When Jennifer saw the news story about her mother watching a child nearly die from an asthma attack, she was horrified. Jennifer called her mother for the first time in months. "Mom, how could you do this?" Jennifer's voice was broken, filled with a pain that cut deeper than any public humiliation. "I became a nurse because you taught me to help people. You used to volunteer at the children's hospital when I was little. What happened to you?" For the first time since the incident, Karen broke down completely. "I don't know," Karen whispered into the phone. I was so focused on the rules, on maintaining order. I didn't think." "You didn't think about a child who couldn't breathe?" Jennifer interrupted. "Mom, that little girl could have died. She could have died while you stood there worried about a plastic table." The conversation lasted 3 hours. Jennifer told her mother about the children she cared for in the pediatric ICU, about families who would give anything for one more day with their sick children, about parents who sat by hospital beds praying for their child to take just one more breath. "That little girl, Emma, she's someone's whole world, Mom. She's everything to her parents. And you nearly took her away from them over 6 inches of grass." Karen hung up the phone and sat in her perfect house with its perfect lawn and its perfect silence, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had done. Meanwhile, the Rodriguez family found themselves surrounded by a community they never expected. Jake visited regularly, becoming like an uncle to Emma. He taught her about courage, about standing up for what's right, about the difference between rules and justice. Colonel Washington established a scholarship fund for Emma's future education, seeded with donations from military families across the country. The new HOA president, elected unanimously, was Mrs. Chin, the elderly neighbor who had witnessed the entire incident. Her first official act was to establish the Emma Rodriguez Emergency Protocol, stating that any HOA regulation could be suspended immediately in case of medical emergencies. Miguel was offered a better-paying construction job by a veteran-owned company that had heard about the incident. Sofia received a full scholarship to complete her nursing degree, funded by donations from military families who wanted to support someone dedicated to saving lives. But perhaps the most meaningful change came from Emma herself. 6 months after the incident, Emma stood up at a community meeting and asked to speak. Her parents were surprised. Their shy daughter rarely spoke in public. "I want to thank the nice soldier man who saved me," Emma said, her voice clear and strong. "And I want to tell everyone that I'm not scared anymore. My daddy says that when bad things happen, good people come to help. And lots of good people came to help me." Emma looked directly at Jake, who was sitting in his usual spot behind her family. Mr. Jake, you told me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. I want to be brave like you. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Emma continued, I also want to say something about the mean lady. My mama taught me that hurt people sometimes hurt other people. Maybe the mean lady was hurt inside, and that's why she couldn't help me. I hope she gets better so she can help other kids if they need it. The 8-year-old's words of forgiveness were more powerful than any condemnation could have been. After the meeting, Jake knelt down to Emma's level. You know what, Emma? You're already braver than most soldiers I know. It takes real courage to forgive someone who hurt you. My mama says forgiveness is for me, not for her, Emma replied wisely. It means I don't have to carry angry feelings in my heart. Jake smiled, thinking about the battles he had fought overseas and the battle he had fought right here on Maple Street. Your mama is a very smart lady. And you're going to grow up to be an amazing woman. 1 year later, Emma Rodriguez celebrated her 9th birthday with the biggest party Maple Street had ever seen. Military families from 3 states attended, along with neighbors who had become like extended family. Karen Whitmore watched from her window as the street filled with laughter, music, and the sound of children playing. She had been invited. Emma had insisted on it despite her parents' reservations, but Karen couldn't bring herself to join the celebration. She had spent the year in therapy, trying to understand how she had become the kind of person who could watch a child suffer and do nothing. She had volunteered at the children's hospital, performed community service, and written countless letters of apology that she never sent. But the damage was done. She had revealed her true character in that moment of crisis, and no amount of good deeds could erase the image of her turning away from a dying child. As Karen watched Emma blow out her birthday candles, surrounded by people who loved and protected her, she finally understood what she had lost. Not just her position or her reputation, but her connection to the basic human decency that makes communities more than just collections of houses. Emma's wish, as she blew out her candles, was simple. I wish for all the kids in the world to have people who will help them when they're scared. It was a wish born from a child who had learned too young that not all adults could be trusted to do the right thing, but who had also learned that when good people stand together, they can overcome the worst that humanity has to offer. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison received a commendation from his commanding officer for his actions that day. But he never displayed it with his other medals. Instead, he kept Emma's thank you card, decorated with drawings of butterflies and hearts, in his wallet as a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on foreign soil, but in our own neighborhoods, protecting the innocent from those who would abuse their small measure of power. The story of Emma Rodriguez and the day Karen Whitmore showed her true colors became a lesson taught in conflict resolution classes at the local military base. It illustrated how quickly situations can escalate when authority is wielded without compassion, and how true leadership means protecting the vulnerable, not enforcing arbitrary rules. Years later, Emma would indeed become a veterinarian, just as she had dreamed. She would name her practice Second Chance Animal Hospital, remembering the second chance she had been given by a soldier who chose compassion over convenience. And on quiet summer evenings when the heat pressed down on Maple Street like a heavy blanket, Emma would sometimes sit on her front porch, now equipped with a proper shade structure built by her father and approved unanimously by the HOA, and remember the day she learned that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear combat boots and carry the courage to break down doors when a child's life hangs in the balance. Sometimes they wear the uniform of ordinary neighbors who choose to stand up and speak out when they witness injustice. And sometimes they're 8 years old, teaching adults about forgiveness and the power of choosing hope over hatred. The water table still sits in the Rodriguez's front yard, no longer a symbol of neighborhood conflict but a reminder that some battles are worth fighting, some rules are worth breaking, and some children are worth saving, no matter what it costs.